My name is Christopher Smith, and the workshop that I did for the AML conference was how not to do queer studies towards an anti-homophobic teaching practice in the classroom. In terms of how I organized the workshop, what I wanted to do is first kind of demystify what queer studies is or what queer theory is, and to actually try and extrapolate some of the critical resources that can be used to enable, I guess, more nuanced conversations about complicated social issues. And the way that I wanted to tie that into media literacy is simply to kind of start with the premise of what queer theory is, which is basically looking at how certain norms get established and how they're deployed. So I started off by, just kind of with that kind of opening, and then drew the students' attention to the recent It Gets Better campaign, the campaign that's been launched by Dan Savage as a way to respond to what we're now considering as a recent upsurge in teen suicides. And the reason why I chose to bring our attention and bring a queer critique to these narratives, because initially the workshop was actually going to be looking more at pop culture. But once I saw this campaign, I realized actually no, I want to kind of shift the focus a bit more onto what this campaign imagines itself as doing. Because initially my first reaction to it is, although I understood the intent in terms of trying to create a kind of intergenerational connection between queer youth and those who have made it out of high school, I noticed that at the end of the day, the narratives seem to be very, very similar, pretty much representing primarily middle class, white gay males' experiences after high school. And I thought that also the premise of, well, it gets better, almost makes everyone complacent in terms of not actually challenging the institutional parameters that enable this to happen in the first place. And so for me, as much as it's, very, very heartwarming, it didn't seem to make sense to me to not also send a message that students should, that youth should be demanding accountability from the institutions that they suffer in. And then, outside of that, one of the other things that I did was juxtapose that campaign with another campaign that's coming out of a very set of coalitions under the name of Embracing Intersectional Diversity. And I guess you could kind of see this organization as kind of augmenting the very, very kind of primarily white middle-class narratives of It Gets Better, where it's primarily queers of color that are also kind of producing their own narratives, but also challenging us to not just look at, homophobia as existing in a vacuum, but rather people's experiences intersect based on how they're socially located, based on race, gender, their gendered identities, etc., as well as class and ability. My sense is some people will find queer theory very intimidating because it is very, very high theoretical. But when you kind of break it down, it does provide us with tools to go beyond an identity politics and actually learn to kind of look at institutions. And so when I switched to focusing on the It Gets Better campaign, it very much shifted from what was initially going to be looking at the way in which shows like Glee and Ugly Betty, while on the one hand there's this interesting kind of representation of queer youth on television, one of the things that you notice right from the very, very get-go is that none of the important characters are challenging the institutions. After we kind of looked at the videos, we just basically opened the floor for a dialogue, which is what I felt would be the most productive way of actually getting people to, starting with the premise of we're going to establish, well, what kind of norms are these videos setting up? One participant had said, I probably wouldn't necessarily utilize this video as a way to say this is what gay life is, but rather ask students, from a kind of a civics kind of perspective, what has to be happening in the world for these videos to be necessary? And that's a completely different take on it, because it's not just simply trying to engender tolerance from students, but rather getting them to think about how homophobia operates within a larger societal framework. So in this sense, it's not just simply something that's added on as part of a course, for like a special day or whatnot,
Yes.
but rather you're utilizing these insights to look at, society as a whole. When you find yourself marginalized within society, you already develop certain kinds of critical reading skills to kind of understand how how your own individual person is being perceived, what kinds of narratives are being told about you, and then also finding ways to provide a counter narrative. And so, uh, for me, these are the kinds of things that I'm trying to kind of push media studies to consider, as well as with conversations within media literacy. Is that in many cases most youth already have these skills to a certain degree because we're always engaging in realms of representation, whether or not we like them or not. I mean, it's very much embedded in our social fabric, and so I kind of want to nurture that. And so I guess my theoretical positioning is very much kind of like an amalgamation of like critical reading skills that I've learned through Black studies, as well as through queer theory, as well as through feminist theory, and so, but very much kind of integrating them to provide something tangible as a practice that can be utilized by students.